We usually think about the voter fraud narrative coming from the right, but a lot of the cyber threat narrative is coming from the left. And this is where there are the challenges that we're seeing span the political spectrum. So you have seen headlines along these lines. Top secret NSA report details Russian hacking effort days before the 2016 election. Russian cyber hacks on US electoral system far wider than previously known. Will the Georgia special election get hacked? Elections officials outgunned in Russia's cyber war against America. Hackers at DEF CON conference exploit vulnerabilities in voting machines. Hacking the vote, why voting systems aren't as secure as you might think. Hack vulnerable voting machines, a national security threat, experts warn. That was very recent, that was just last week. So I want to talk a little bit first about the hacking narrative and about the cyber threats that are out there. Because there are a lot of there's a lot of confusion about the actual facts, and I think it's important to get this right. Now, the first fact is the threat is real. No one's saying that the threat isn't real. Russia is attempting to influence our elections, and one of the ways they're doing that, in addition to the social media and fake news that they've been doing, and that's absolutely established, is they have been attempting intrusions into some of the election systems. However, there are only 2 confirmed attempted hacks of an actual election system, with only 1 successful. Those were both attempted hacks of voter registration databases that are held at the statewide level. The first one, the unsuccessful one, was in Arizona. The FBI detected that a login credential used by one of the local election officials was being sold on the dark web. Before that could ever be used to access the system, the FBI notified the state of Arizona. The state of Arizona shut down all access to their system immediately. It was completely unsuccessful. No one ever got access to any Arizona voter registration data. But the one that was successful was Illinois. In late June of 2016, IP addresses associated with Russia started accessing data from the Illinois statewide voter registration database. And they did it very slowly. They were just collecting a few records at a time. And it didn't trigger any warnings. It didn't hit any threshold where they would notice it. Their bandwidth wasn't changed in any way. And this happened for about 2+ weeks where they didn't notice it. And then about mid-July, all of a sudden Russia turned up the volume and they started accessing about 10 records a second. And this caught the attention of Illinois officials. And they noticed it right away. And they shut down access. And by the way, this is all from testimony from June's hearing before the Senate Intelligence Committee. The director of this Illinois State Board of Elections was testifying. So an important thing about this is no data was changed. They confirmed that. No data was deleted. This was just an access of records. Now, why would a foreign power slowly be accessing records and then all of a sudden in the middle of July turn the volume way up, which was sure to get noticed? And why would they do this in the state of Illinois, which honestly, I don't know how much Hillary won that by, but she won it by double digits, and it wasn't going to be close. What was happening in mid-July? The conventions were about to start. And in fact, President Trump's first tweet about rigging happened on August 4th. Okay? Now, I don't have any information that indicates there's a connection between those two, by any means. But Russia wasn't trying to change that information, and most security experts and intelligence experts agree on that. What were they trying to do? They wanted to be noticed. They wanted us to worry about what was happening with our election technology, and they wanted to do it at a point in time when it was going to get the most notice and get the most play. There's been reports that 21 states were scanned. These two were part of the 21 states. That's true, by Russia. But I'll also tell you this, all 50 states were almost certainly scanned. And in fact, if you work with any databases anywhere, it's almost certain that your databases are being scanned. That happens all the time. There are bots that are set up to do this. Scanning is not a hack. Scanning is not a penetration. It is just what normally happens in our environment. What a lot of folks in the tech world will call it is rattling doorknobs. They're rattling doorknobs to see which ones are locked or unlocked. If something's locked, they'll move on to the next doorknob. So that's happening in all the states, but only 2 states saw any kind of breach in any way or attempted breach. But, and this is very important, the voter registration systems are different than the voting systems themselves and the tabulation systems that go along with those voting systems. And there remains, to this day, almost a year after the election, zero evidence that there was any hacking of the vote totals themselves. This is despite repeated investigations. There is a narrative out there that says that no one has looked for this. That is absolutely false, and I'll give you an example. In June, these two professors at the University of Michigan, one a computer science professor, one a political science professor, looked at all of the ballots and ballot images from Michigan and Wisconsin. Why did they have those ballot images available? Because there were statewide recounts in Michigan and Wisconsin. So they actually had access to all of the ballots, and they looked at Michigan and Wisconsin. And by the way, very importantly, 2 of the 3 states without which President Trump wouldn't have won the election, and 2 of the 3 states that Secretary Clinton would have needed to win the election instead. And this was their conclusion. Our analysis offers evidence that the voting technology did not distort the votes in Wisconsin or Michigan. How a vote was treated appears not to have depended on which candidate the vote was for. If there was a hack, it appears not to have changed the results. There are very, very rarely investigations of this caliber that happen after an election. This is something in an independent investigation of ballots demonstrated in 2 of the 3 states that were absolutely essential to the election. And I think many people don't realize, we hear, and especially for you here in New Jersey, where you do have voting technology that does not utilize a paper trail or an auditable record in some way, at least some places within New Jersey. There are more places in the United States today that have paper ballots than at any point in time since the computer age began. Especially non-punch card paper ballots. The punch cards, we got rid of those after the 2000 election. So 75% of all people in the United States vote on paper now. That's more than ever before. And over half the states require audits of that paper as a matter of course. So we actually have more security in that way than we ever have before. Is it enough? No. I'll talk about that again. But it's better than it ever has been. And very importantly, the states that are entirely paper include Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, Florida, Colorado. I could go on. There's a lot of those states that have paper. So we're talking about battleground states that have entirely paper throughout the entire state. All right, so now let me move back to the voter fraud issue, because I want to talk a little bit about that as well. If you ask, and we've done studies of this, if you ask people in the country if they believe that voter fraud is a problem, you get vast majorities saying yes. You get vast majorities of Democrats saying yes. You get vast majorities of minority Democrats saying yes. The narrative has gone out of control, and people are very, very worried about voter fraud. The problem is that most people, when they think of voter fraud, they're thinking of not a very specific thing, but a very, very broad kind of nebulous force that's operating against elections. And that's why one of the challenges we face in elections is, for most people out there, when you say voter fraud or vote suppression or dark money or hacking, those all fall into the same nebulous concern for people. And some of those things are coming from the left, and some of those things are coming from the right. But it is all operating to suppress voters' confidence in the system and diminish that confidence in the system. So a lot of people think about voter fraud, but they don't necessarily, if you ask them, what do you mean by voter fraud, they start talking about all kinds of different things that don't necessarily equate to the same thing. But when we're talking about voter fraud in this context, what I'm talking about is people illegally casting ballots they should not be able to cast. Either they're ineligible to vote and they shouldn't be voting, or they're eligible to vote but they're voting and they're voting more than once. Here's what's been found. The states routinely do investigations of this. It's often a narrative amongst those who want to make you think that voter fraud exists, that we just don't know. No one really knows, and no one ever looks for it. But the fact is, these states, and I should just mention that of these 4 states, 3 of them, the bottom 3, are run predominantly by Republicans. North Carolina has a board of elections. Ohio and Tennessee has a Republican Secretary of State. California has a Democratic Secretary of State. And this is the results of their investigations in 2016 and the number of voter fraud cases they found. And you'll see the numbers, kind of hover right around 0.001%. That's a number we see repeatedly when we look at this kind of, when we look at the investigations. But it's not just the states who have done this. The George W. Bush Justice Department, partially during the time when I was there, started a huge investigation to try to demonstrate widespread voter fraud. And they found literally a couple of dozen cases out of hundreds of millions of votes cast. Similarly, academics have looked at this and found a few dozen cases out of hundreds of millions of votes cast. Even the Conservative Heritage Foundation, which is one of the organizations trying to push the myth of voter fraud, likes to trumpet the fact that they have found 1,000 cases of voter fraud. Those date back to 1948. There are literally billions of votes that have been cast during that period of time. For any of you that have run a business in your life, if someone came to you and said, I can guarantee that we'll have a fraud percentage in your business of 0.001%. How fast would you sign on the dotted line for that? Banks usually incorporate about a 2% fraud rate because they make enough money that they can absorb that, and it would cost too much to try to get that down further. This is a remarkably low rate. Voter fraud exists. It's not zero, but it's not much more than zero. It's very, very small in the United States. I think that actually says something really good about Americans and how seriously they take their right to vote and their responsibility to vote. So what have these two narratives contributed to, and given the crisis state that we were probably already in prior to November 2016? Well, this is a poll that was taken in late June of 2017. And the question was asked, how much do you trust that elections are fair? This poll was done by NPR. And if you look overall, 47% of the United States says they don't trust that their elections are fair at all or very much. Nearly half of all voters have very little trust that elections are fair. Now, Republicans have a little more trust. That is normal. We have seen in the past, if you ask people about confidence in the election system after an election, the winning party always has more confidence than the losing party. Overall confidence in the elections in 2004 and 2008 were exactly the same, except if you divided them by party, they were flipped. And so overall, you see these numbers. But we don't see numbers like this 8 months after an election. That's incredibly rare. These are very, very low numbers. Independents, roughly 50%. Democrats, over 50%, of course. I don't know what these numbers mean yet. We've never seen this before. And it's something that concerns me a great deal, and we're going to have to see how this plays out over time. But the narratives we're seeing are coming again from both sides, and I want to stress that. Here are narratives that mostly come from the left. WikiLeaks proves primary was rigged. DNC undermined democracy. Sanders supporters walk off convention floor, blame rigged system for his loss. And then from the right, almost half of Republicans say Trump won the popular vote. 47% of Republicans. Which I don't think I need to tell you, he did not win the popular vote. He lost by over 3 million. And then this was a fairly recent polling conclusion that happened in August. In a new poll, half of Republicans say would support postponing the 2020 election if Trump proposed. I feel fairly confident. I know sometimes, and Tom is probably in the same boat, we don't like to talk about what the Supreme Court would do for sure, or what we know. I feel fairly confident the Supreme Court would not go along with that. But you know, this is a remarkable expression of the state of mind of the American voter. I call it the fragile psyche of the American voter right now.